Yeah, so we met in high school, and we bonded because we wrestled together. We both studied Japanese, and he actually spent a full year in Japan. He's quick on the uptake with learning languages and pretty much anything very quickly. He has a very systematic way of learning. And it's not just because of the way his brain is structured, but it's because of the way he approaches things. So he'll basically take notes and review his notes so that he's building a framework of knowledge as he goes. So, as most people just show up to wrestling practice, just them, he would show up with a notebook because he knew that there'd be technique taught. And that's actually been borne out now. When we were wrestling, I don't know if you're too familiar with grappling or wrestling. So basically, like you can imagine there are technicians and there are like brawny guys who just come out and just try to smush you.
Yep.
Tim is physically strong, but he's like a technical encyclopedia, and so at the time, Dan Gable and the University of Iowa ethos of like training really hard and just getting really tough and not letting anybody tire you out was sort of the paradigm of the era of like the 90s and stuff like that. Contrary to the way that international wrestling has evolved, like for example the Soviet systems and stuff like that, they're much more technical. And we as Americans do okay, but the reason why we've gotten better is because we have finally gotten up the technical curve. And there was a guy who was actually an MMA fighter. I think his name is Askren, known as the Funk. I don't know if you follow that, but he was basically a guy who was never really intimidating. He was kind of a wild man. He would talk a lot of smack, and he had this big afro, but he wasn't like one of those ripped jack guys that you usually see that's like, oh crap, this guy's going to kill me. Because wrestling is a very physical sport. If the guy's stronger and faster, it's going to be difficult to beat him. But as I learned when I went to the Division I level after high school, it's like I lost to guys that were physically weaker, that had worse stamina because they were just better technically. They'd started at a younger age. These guys have proven that wrestling is way more of a chess match. And I think that, Josh Waitzkin is a perfect example of this. The guy is literally a prodigy. He's the chess champion. This is another one of Tim's friends. He is now a consultant for people who want to make decisions better. And he's also a jiu-jitsu champion in his own right, and actually helped to fund the beginning of one of the biggest jiu-jitsu schools in New York City. Yeah. There's a bunch of, badasses. And then there's also like the meathead contingent of like brawny dudes that are just like roided out and who just like squeeze your neck, and you're just like, oh man. But it's like, that doesn't get you to that upper echelon. You know what I mean? It's the guys that are tough and strong and mentally there, and then they just like, they're just like a chess program. They're a supercomputer. They're like 20 moves ahead of you. You fell into their trap as soon as you touch them. Right. And Tim's kind of like that. And he's gotten there because of his study of that science of movement, of the chain wrestling and all that stuff. He's got quite a repertoire of different martial arts skills that he was able to bring to bear. And that's how, as our, after we left college, we were in touch in college and everything, just sort of homies and stuff. He eventually, when I was training for, in Sanshou, which is like Chinese kickboxing, so you can kick, punch, and wrestle. It was kind of a precursor when UFC had just started, and it was sort of like, it's more like K1 style fighting. And so he came to my gym, and was able to apply a lot of his grappling to that sport, and won a national title. Fought this really rangy striker who was just beating his head in. And kicking the crap out of him. Tim was just like flowing blood out of his nose. It didn't matter though, because Tim's got a good chin, and he was just like, he had cut a lot of weight, so he was walking through the kid's punches. The kid he was hurting Tim, but he wasn't knocking him out. And then Tim would just throw him off the ring, and he would do it twice around until until the fight was over. So it's kind of like that sumo skill. And Tim had actually trained in a sumo dojo in Japan. So he was, he brought to bear all these different skills. And I think that's part of sort of his philosophy is like, you got to be smart in life and work and turn things to your advantage, right? Where you have your better skill set, that's where you want to bring the fight is to that sort of arena. And then the book, he and I went to Panama together. He had some free time on his hands after he had done some software sales, and he went down to Argentina to study tango, and he came through Panama on his way, and we met up there, and he met a bunch of my friends, and he met a family friend of ours, and we stayed with them on this island, and he's done really well for himself, and he has like a beautiful house out there and everything, but he saw that their lifestyle was so relaxed and happy. Latin Americans are just like, they really enjoy life, and he learned that that's really what he wanted. He was very serious, and I think like one of his like challenges in life is that he works his butt off, but then he sees people that are really much happier than he is, and he's like, wait, why am I working so hard? What I want is happiness. And you can see that like on his cover, you know what I mean? It's like a dude in a hammock or something like that, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, how can I get myself from like being this like workaholic basically to a place where I feel like I deserve what I've gotten and I'm happy. And that's like the life goal. And I think that's what's really cool about what Tim has done is that, and as he's evolved as a human, you've seen it through his books, through his podcasts and everything like that. It's like, okay, now we're going to do 4-hour work week, but then, okay, now we're going to take care of our bodies. Now we're going to take care of how we eat. And the whole thing is like, also he's now, in pursuit of like spiritual, I don't know if you want to say enlightenment, but somewhat, I mean, he's doing inner journeys now and advocating that for people as well. So it's like the total package as he has evolved from his, youth to manhood or middle age or whatever you want to say. It's kind of like a guide for people, and pretty, I'm proud of him for doing that. I think that, he already knew judo somewhat. He had been studying judo as a kid, and he had a martial arts instructor out in Long Island that was a mentor for him. And he was an important guy for him, and that was quite formative. And then Tim and I were fortunate enough in high school to have wrestled under a great coach. Not only was he a coach, but he was also an educator who went on to be the head of Culver Academy. This guy named John Buxton. John Buxton has been a mentor for a lot of people in that wrestling program. His brother or I guess his blood cousin, but they call each other brothers because they grew up together in the same house. Jeff Buxton is now the head coach of the U.S. team, like the U.S. Olympic team. So it's a pretty big name in wrestling, Buxton. And Buxton also, he was about fostering student athletes, not just sort of meatheads. And he was actually my English teacher my senior year in high school. He taught essay writing. Important, like, I guess, an impact on us, on me and Tim, to be trained by an intelligent, a tactician, a strategist, and a good wrestling technician who was also, physically good at wrestling, but also a proponent of composure during competition. And I think that not only had he already started to develop that penchant for technique, he already had it. When he got to St. Paul's, all he needed was a guy to continue teaching him the technique. And it just worked out well because, Tim became he was New England champion, even though he only wrestled for 3 years in high school, really. And then one of his years he was in Japan. I think, with Tim's interviewing now, Tim has become a very good interviewer, and that's something that he's worked on. I've seen him prepare for interviews. He always prepares very well. And he prepares very hard for his interviews, but then he's able to just be quite relaxed without, sort of being nervous. He's got that confidence. So I think that who he is from when he was born, like if you compare nature versus nurture, his nature is one of a highly intelligent person, but his nurture is to work his ass off and make what he has, make the most of it. The most obvious one, and everyone will say this, is the Pareto principle.
Right.
I think I had heard about it, but I hadn't really read it as simply as he put it. And actually, since then I went to business school, and they talk about that a lot as well.
Yep.
But there are some times when I absolutely can't do that. Like now, I've actually transitioned my career away from finance, and now I work in engineering. So there are certain things where you simply have to go down to the last detail and get really detail oriented in order to make sure the jobs go right. But there is a time and a place for that. Like once you're on the move, you can't just stop and slow things down. You got to keep the momentum, and if like for example, in a construction or an engineering job, when you're going to actually build the thing, you have your blueprints, and there's a million things on there that you're going to have to do in order to build a building. And there's going to be a few things that are going to go wrong, right? So you just have to focus on what's the big picture stuff, and I think that's something that American culture has led to American culture's success, both economically and like in international conflicts as well. It's not always about, like for example, French are famous for over engineering things. When they do something, that's why their nuclear power plants are great and they can rely on them, because they over engineer the heck out of things, and they make very beautifully engineered things, but it takes you twice as long and twice as much money to actually design and build something when you're a French person, because they'll just review it and beat it up, and they're bureaucratic, and it's their culture. Our culture is more Pareto principle based as Americans. We're willing to just let it fly, and just, if there's a mistake, you either deal with it, you roll with the punches, you fix it, and then you move on. And so that's sort of something that I've applied when appropriate. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was making markets in derivatives. So you have these portfolios of derivatives, and you have basically this screen that someone developed telling you kind of what to look at. And to some extent, you also have to determine what's important to look at. And as a trader, that was important, but it was also important as even actually more important when I was in operations, where you didn't have as much of a natural eye for what was what could be risky, and if there were as an operations person, you're basically just trying to make everything go smoothly. And if you have an eye for what the greatest risk factors are, and focusing on those rather than just trying to focus on everything, that's going to save you a lot of time and if mistakes do happen, which they will, they're hopefully going to be the small mistakes that aren't going to cost you a lot of money or your job or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that the Pareto principle holds there.
Mm-hmm.
And then in trading, obviously, you just, especially as a market maker, you got to look out for what's the most risky thing. To some degree, I would say that that probably is what led me to leave finance, or at least leave the trading career, the trading path, because I am a person who's detail oriented. I like to build things, physical things, and I'm not a natural gambler. There's some guys that can go to a casino and win money.
Mm-hmm.
There's some guys that can go to a casino and kind of break even most of the time. I'm one of those guys. I'm a little more risk averse, I would say. So, but I know how to identify risk, but I'm not a guy who can hold massive stores of information and data in my head to the point that I can almost count cards or know how to read people so well that I know when is the time to bet. And that's where I think that those gamblers have an intrinsic sort of, whether it's from learning mathematics or just having played lots of games in their life, they know how to identify what's important and what's not, and when to move and what decisions to make. Someone like Josh Waitzkin probably is a natural gambler. He knows games and game theory in a way that's just integral to his thinking, to his mind, and that's why I left finance, was because I didn't have that innate advantage that other people in the market do, and it's not worth it to just be a guy who's got his butt in the seat and gets paid okay. If you're going to work in that business, you're doing it to make the millions and then get out, because otherwise you'll lose your soul if you just stay in there your whole life chasing money. I mean, I'll just, I'm not going to try to frame an answer that's particular to this question. I'm just going to answer it straight out. What I actually love is I read history. Mm-hmm. And some of my favorite books have been recently a book called American Ulysses, which is about Ulysses S. Grant. There was also a great book on Dwight D. Eisenhower, which was called and both of these are in audiobook also. I think I got these in audiobook. I also liked the author's name is McCullough. His book on John Adams was another book. So those are the American history books. And right now I'm just reading Winston Churchill's History of the English-Speaking Peoples. So I've gotten into history a lot. And I think in terms of like career development and stuff like that, there have been a couple things, but more than anything, I think it's reading history books about people that has inspired me and had an impact on how I've viewed my career and how I've approached my career. I mean, I think, for me, Ulysses S. Grant was great because the guy was kind of a nobody for a lot of his life, and only came up the ranks like later on once the Civil War began. So it kind of leaves hope for those people that are, like those people who are 20 years into a career and kind of wondering, okay, what do I do with this? That was one of your questions. And if I may, I'll just kind of like jump. I actually worked in finance for what felt like more like 10 years, but was really only like 7 or 8 years. From like 1999 to 2006, I worked at UBS, first in operations, and then got onto the trading floor as a equity derivatives market maker. And another book recommendation, actually, now that I think about it, is Flash Boys. Michael Lewis, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
book.
unlike Tim, I'm not as great with names. But I just read that one, and that actually discusses a lot of the stuff that I saw going on while I was working as a market maker. I was in finance, and I basically was the markets really were at that point more moving on a daily basis. The whole market would respond to the price of commodities, like energy commodity prices.
Okay.
Would drive the market, would drive, tech stocks, everything. It drove the S&P 500. A huge correlation between the resources commodity complex. And I started getting interested in energy as a result. And so I went to business school, and then while I was there, I used that as a way to kind of reinvent myself as an energy person. I got a job at a startup that was going to be doing biodiesel marketing, feedstock commodity marketing and trading. But we didn't even really get to launch before the 2008 crisis hit, and our funders pulled all our funding, and we just kind of like all of us scattered to the wind, and we all started over again. And I was lucky enough to, get a job that allowed me to eat like better than instant ramen, because I started over as doing construction for $15 an hour, and then I was like, I think I took a scaffolding to the head one day, and I was like, you know what, I really need to get back into a desk. This is not the right thing for me to do.
Right.
And which was just my ultimate goal anyway. But I got a job with an engineering firm, just crunching numbers for the boss, basically telling him what his ROI would be on investments into cogeneration equipment, which allows you to recapture heat energy and use it for you have a cogeneration machine is something that produces electricity and heat, so you can use it for both. And instead of like a pure power generator, which is about 30 to 40% efficient, these are like 80 to 85% efficient. And that was as a result of having worked in the biofuel industry. I realized that after reading Michael Pollan's book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, another big recommendation, that book changed my life and really created an ethical pang of conscience for me in being involved in the biodiesel sector, which really was directly contributing to primary rainforest deforestation in Indonesia and Malaysia. They're basically chopping down, they're clear cutting primary, virgin rainforest in order to plant palm oil plantations. And then they're using that palm oil to substitute it for diesel fuel. That's not sustainable. It's a greenwash. And with that experience, I kind of decided that I was more interested after reading the McKinsey carbon productivity report. The McKinsey Global Institute publishes a bunch of incredible documents, and including the 2006 carbon productivity report, which talks about how, as a country, we will get more GDP dollars per carbon ton burned. And that hierarchy, and the number one thing we could do was energy efficiency technologies. And that's where I decided, okay, boom, that's what I'm going to do. I've always been kind of a tree hugger, despite being quite pragmatic in terms of finance and harnessing the power of capitalism to do good. Jumped on that bandwagon and started learning about energy efficient technologies and their implementation, the design and construction of those technologies. And that's how I transitioned my career, was using basically the fact that I'd learned a lot about spreadsheets and how to crunch numbers, and being quantitatively inclined to working at an engineering firm telling them, okay, well, this is what you want to do, and this is what it means in terms of dollars, because I could figure out present value for them. I think a lot of people are intimidated by finance much more than they should be. Half the guys we had in our trading floor were, engineer trained, and it's very easy to make the jump from engineering to finance, and it should be just as easy for an engineer to do financial equations. Write.
Okay.
Every day. Write every day.
Why?
And write down your dreams and listen to them. Go back and read them.
Okay.
That's how you leave a legacy. That's what you leave on earth. We'll be gone and we'll be back in the dirt, but people will be able to read what you wrote. And it's the only way. It's a way to put down your voice. No one's going to go back and listen to your voicemails or anything like that, but they're going to read what you wrote,
Right.